all cities are made of what I call background buildings. So I've always felt very passionately that the spaces between buildings, that the streets and the boulevards that connect buildings should really form the background of the city. And I've always been fascinated by the way that great cities do still have iconic buildings within them. Florence has Brunelleschi's fantastic dome that of course is the centerpiece of the city, and many of the buildings around it are background buildings. In many ways London is a similar city. You have St. Paul's, you have some very beautiful iconic buildings within the city, but there are also many background buildings within the city. And our work really seeks to mediate between the iconic buildings, the modern buildings, and the historical brain of the city.
The JRA concept of contextual modernism is, I think, quite a useful one, because on the one hand it says the architecture we do is what one would describe as contemporary as opposed to classical or some other historic style. But on the other hand, it's not saying our building will have primacy over anything that surrounds it.
Contextual modernism is the ethos of John Robertson Architects. It's a philosophy that I think we've really gradually developed over our 20-year period. I've always been very interested in how buildings work within the city and how buildings work within cities. And I think there's a great opportunity for buildings to work in harmony with one another, but I also think there's a great opportunity for individual buildings to stand out from the crowd. 120 Fleet Street is very much a contextual modern solution. Here we are dealing with a very large building for a North American investment bank being built within the Fleet Street conservation area and with the Daily Express building linked to it. Our solution was really to understand and look at the very different townscape of each of the streets and to model the building to sit within that variegated townscape. And we used stone on the Fleet Street frontage, whereas we used metal and glass on Shoe Lane and on St. Bride Street. We're modernists at heart, but our buildings, I like to think, are composed in what I call a macro scale. The building must work within the scale of the city, first and foremost, but we also work in what I call a layered micro scale, where we start to examine the facades in detail. We look at the proportion of how the facade works both for the building and for its neighbour. We look at how the base, the middle and the top of the building work. We examine the relationship of the internal spaces, the atriums and the courtyards and the plan of the building, so that we produce what I'd like to think is well-mannered, well-fashioned, nicely detailed buildings that use interesting materials, but probably materials that are already being used in the city: granite, Portland stone, limestone, Roman brick, faience. They're the palette of materials that we quite enjoy using on many of our buildings. We would be proponents of doing this work in a very modern and uncompromising way. We don't revert to the classical textbooks or pastiche, but we're certainly aware of the disciplines brought about through historical architecture.